Okay. This week's Torah reading, Parshat Nasso, begins Numbers 4:21, and we'll be reading all the way through to Numbers 7:89. It's one of the longer Torah readings. Not the longest, but one of the longer ones. And I'd like to focus on a difficult part of the reading, and that is the story of the Sotah. Yes. The Sotah is the, here it's called the ordeal of jealousy. I like that. Page 589. And it's Numbers chapter 5, verse 11. So it's a difficult reading because, well, you'll see the story. Here's the story in a nutshell, okay? Verse 12. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, if any man's wife go aside and act unfaithfully against him, and a man lie with her carnally, and she be hid from the eyes of her husband, and it be defiled secretly, and there's no witness, the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and she was defiled. So there are no witnesses, there's nobody knows actually, but he has a spirit of jealousy. He's untrusting of his wife for good reason. Or, and alternatively, it's possible that the spirit of jealousy come upon him and he be jealous of his wife and she be not defiled.
So unjustly jealous.
Unjustly jealous for no good reason. Just because he's insecure, I guess. Okay, so then we have the process of the Sotah. The man shall bring his wife unto the priest, and the process that ensues is that he shall bring an offering. He has to bring her. He'll bring her to the priest in the temple, and they'll have an offering of barley flour, which has no oil placed upon it, nor frankincense, as the usual meal offering does. And then the priest shall take some water in a sacred vessel, sprinkle earth from the ground of the tabernacle and put it into the water. And then he'll uncover her hair, mess it up, and place this offering into her hand. And he will make her promise. She of course protests her innocence the whole time. He says, if you didn't do anything wrong, then these waters will purify you. If you did something wrong, then these waters will cause you to die. And she says, Amen. Okay? And then this text that the priest announced before her, to which she said Amen, is erased, is rubbed out into the water.
Text is written.
Yes, so that would be the text. He would say, from verse 19, I'm not sure exactly which. It's the text is explicit, is indicated in the Talmud in Gittin, but if I'm remembering, basically would begin from verse 19. If no man has lain with you, and if you have not gone aside to uncleanness being under your husband, then you'll be free from this water of bitterness that causes this curse. But if you have gone aside being under your husband, and if you are defiled, and some man has lain with you besides your husband, then the priest shall call, period, comma, then inserts the narrator, then the priest shall cause the woman to swear with the oath of cursing. The priest shall say unto the woman, the Lord make thee a curse and an oath among thy people. When the Lord doth make thy thigh to fall away and thy belly to swell, and she'll die. And this water that causes the curse shall go into your bowels and make your belly swell and your thigh fall away, and the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. And then the priest shall write these curses in a scroll. Right? So that's basically from verse 19 until verse 23. Until 22. Right? So what's amazing here, so the rabbis all comment on the fact that we know we're never supposed to erase God's name. And here God's name will have been written in the text, as you see verse 21 has the name of God once, twice. Right? So that's part of the text that's going to be written out. The word, the Lord make thee a curse and an oath among thy people, when the Lord makes your thigh to fall away and your belly to swell. Right? So the Lord's name being written on this parchment is rubbed out into the water till the text dissolves away. And then the woman will be given this water to drink. So, yeah, so everyone got it?
Uh-huh.
I just want to know, what happens if she was raped or something? Is the same punishment? Or?
No. No, this is talking about someone who, this is talking about where she protests her innocence and has nothing to do with what she did or didn't do. It has to do with the jealousy of her husband in this case. Right? So there are two characters in the story. Okay? There's the jealous husband, or I'd say three characters, four characters, right? Who are the characters in the story? We have the jealous husband, we have the wife, right? We have the priest and God. And each one has a part to play. And again, if we're going to look at the story here as a teaching and not as a narrative, right? So we could take the story at arm's length and we could say, shock and horror, it's not fair. This woman is being accused of infidelity. Okay. And what happens if the man was unfaithful? Okay, I hear that question. That's number one. But if we're going to look at the story as a teaching, then we have to pick one character here and say, let me put myself in the shoes of that character. And see what is the teaching in being in those shoes. What is the teaching for me? So I'll say, first of all, again, going back to this question of, is it fair? Despite the fact that, so let's take a step back for a second. Okay, there's two side comments to make. Side comment number one is that you have to understand this in the ancient context, in which it was considered much more severe for a woman to be unfaithful than for a man to be unfaithful, because a man could conceivably have two wives, but a woman could only have one husband. right? So essentially, that's a context here, right? In Jewish practice, we don't do that anymore, but nonetheless, that is a particularity of this story. Another thing to say is that this isn't saying that it's fair that a man is jealous of his wife. It's saying that if if this happens in this particular circumstance, here's a way it could be dealt with. Right? All right, but anyway, it's a difficult reading, it's a difficult story, and it's certainly uncomfortable. So let's just be real with that for a minute. But nonetheless, I think that there is a teaching, something that we can glean from the story that that's very relevant. So again, we're going to choose a character to put ourselves into. So we're not going to be God here, right? God, the rabbis say, the significance, the role that God plays here is that he allows his name to be erased in order to restore trust between husband and wife. Okay? Are we the priest? Are we the one who's bringing husband and wife together? Are we facilitating the ritual? Not today. So we're going to be the jealous husband or the wife who is accused. I'll choose the wife who's accused today. And and then, as the wife who's accused, we have two choices. We can either cry out on the injustice of the fact that I am accused and that it's not fair and my husband is insecure, whatever. Or we can work to repair the relationship. Now, should a person stay with a husband who's insecure and who suspects her and all of that? That's not what this is about here. Right? We're not shooting anyone over here. We're looking at this story and saying, what is the teaching from this particular event, from this dynamic that can exist between two people? So, in this case, what would you say? I don't know if I explained it well, but let's see if you could see what is the main emotion that the woman is feeling in this story. What would you say?
Well, I don't know if that's if she accepts. It depends on whether she is guilty of adultery, whether
Right.
she accepts that is such a crime that it deserves death,
Right.
or whether she's not guilty and she's faced with her husband not trusting her and wonders why.
So let's say rather than looking at what the emotions that she reflexively feels, let's see what are the emotions that the ritual is trying to bring out in her. So let's look at a couple of things over here, okay? First of all, the offering that she's given is made of barley flour, which in ancient times barley was considered animal feed. Wheat was food for people, and barley is animal feed. So people would eat barley bread, but only if they were very poor. So her offering is made of barley flour. Excuse me. offering is made of barley flour, and it has no incense on it, as it normally does, and has no oil on it, which is also considered like a condiment, right? That's point one. Some earth is placed into it. Her hair is uncovered, which is, normally a woman would go with her hair tied or covered. And this is done in the courtyard of the tabernacle. So this is in a very public place. And, kind of like when somebody goes to a pharmacy to buy something for their private needs, and the pharmacist says, "You want what? Aisle 4," right? So that's kind of here. Her secret and her exposure is being announced.
The hardest part of it.
Yes. So what is the feeling that happens in this case? What is the emotion that the ritual is trying to embarrassment, right? Shame, indignity, right? So humility and shame. And that's that's the teaching of this ritual that the woman, in this case me, is trying to absorb or trying to inculcate in her. So if I'm trying to, so the question is like this. Again, now I'm looking at this story not from a moralistic point of view and not from an apologetics point of view, although there's plenty of that here. I'm looking at it from the point of view of the universe that is me, and all the thoughts and feelings that go through my mind, right? And ultimately, this is a story of the repair of a relationship. That's what this is about. Certainly as embodied in the teachings of our sages, where they kind of identify the key phrase here is that God is allowing his name to be erased into the water in order to restore trust between husband and wife. So the water is the universe here. The woman is someone who is on a path to repair. That's what this is about. And whether it's her fault or it's not her fault is something that has to be worked through here. There's another point, which is we can see the woman as a complete victim. Right now, as we try to be introspective and we try to be real with our own lives, we can see the woman as being a complete victim and the husband being totally insecure and delusional. But again, we're getting outside of our own mind and we're entering into trying to analyze someone else rather than looking into our own selves and introspecting the own universe that is me. And so what I might do in that situation is I might say, look, I'm not going to think about my husband right now. I'm going to think about what I did, right? I didn't do anything wrong. Let's say I didn't do anything wrong, right? What role do I have to play in this dynamic? Is there something I'm doing to cause him to feel insecure? Is there something I'm doing to create a sense of distance between us, right? So that's, again, drastic rituals aside, we're looking at the story here, right? This is what's in her mind. And so ultimately, this process of going from being in a state of distrust to being in the blessed state, which is how the story ends, in verse 28, if the woman was not defiled but be clean, then she shall be cleared and shall conceive seed, which kind of is the happy ending of the whole thing. So, so going from this journey from being in a state of distrust to a state of fruition involves shame and involves humility, being humbled. And let's put it in more abstract terms. Okay. In order for me to improve myself, in order to grow, I'm going to have to take some very hard looks at myself and be able to feel the burn as I sit with those imperfections.
Does
And
the woman ever confess
no,
under the depth of the ritual?
if she were to confess, then the ritual would not go through. The ritual only goes through as the woman continually protests her innocence.
Mhm.
And so there,
Why is it done in public though, rather than just between her, the priest, Hashem, and
right.
her husband?
So I'm not saying that. I'm only looking at this post facto, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying what I'm reading from this story is the power of shame, and the power of shame to be transformative. That's what I'm saying, right? Could be. There's a lot of other ways maybe this could work, and certainly there are a lot of other ways to resolve this problem, as you just pointed out. If she were to confess, the whole thing doesn't go through. But I think that the theme here is that shame is transformative. And that's, to me, the most powerful teaching here. So now, there's a fascinating parallel here to Shavuot, the holiday that we just celebrated, right? Remember, Shavuos is the counting of the Omer, right? Shavuos is the conclusion of the counting of the Omer. We go from, so what is the counting of the Omer? What does the word Omer mean? You know this?
If I did, I forgot.
Yeah. Omer means a measure. It's a specific ancient measure of grain. A measure of, in this case, a measure of barley. So the story is that in the first day of Passover, we have no bread at all. On the second day of Passover, we celebrate the new harvest of grain. And a measure, an omer of barley is brought as an offering in the temple. And then from that day, we are to count 49 days, in which time a offering is brought made of bread made out of wheat flour. And that's the holiday of Shavuos. So now I see the barley flour, and I see this parallel. So look at the story of Passover. The story of Passover is you have children of Israel who are assimilated with the Egyptians. They're living within the Egyptian people, and they're taken out of Egypt. And so on day number 1, they're taken out of Egypt. And on day number 2, they begin the process of recreating themselves. They go through the process of creating this new identity, the identity of Jew with God, which will culminate in Shavuos, which is the holiday that celebrates the giving of the Torah, and which is symbolic of the wedding between God and the Jewish people. And so the process of going from Egypt, where we are living in the midst of Egyptian impurity, as far away from God as possible, and going to Shavuos, in which we are completely united with God, and the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai, and all of that, is the process of going from barley to wheat. And so it's almost as though this story recreates that process, or evokes that process. That is to say, or rather, let's look at it other ways. If we as Jews want to go through the process of reaching Shavuos from Pesach, we should notice the barley there and associate it with the sota. As a matter of fact, there's a practice. You check this out. In the Talmud, there's a tractate called Sota that discusses largely this passage. It has 49 pages. And so it's customary to study, many Jews study the tractate Sota from between Passover and Shavuos, every day another page. So we see that theme playing out again in our own journey from impurity to purity, from Egypt to Mount Sinai, involves the barley of the sota, and invariably will involve the shame of looking at oneself in the mirror as one tries to improve. And so the shame here is an integral part of the process of self-transformation, of introspection, and of self-improvement. Yeah, so that may not answer your question why it has to be in public, but I think it helps to bring into stark relief this idea of shame and how important it is in growth. Interestingly enough, the Torah reading also describes an important mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of teshuvah. Just before the story of the sota, right? Verse, page 588, chapter 5, verse 6. Speak to the children of Israel. When a man or woman shall commit any sin that people commit, to commit a trespass against God, and that soul be guilty, then they shall confess their sin which they have done, and from here the rabbis learn the mitzvah of teshuvah, the mitzvah of repentance, of return to God, which is to say, no matter what a person does, it's always possible to be returned, to repair. So again, this theme. Look at the story. It starts with teshuvah. We have the story of the sota, and we have the story of the nazir, which is the next step in the process. And then the story of the nazir is the ascetic, the person who swears off drinking wine. Right. So then we have the person who starts the process of teshuvah, experiences shame, then swears off whatever vices might take a person down, and then finally ends off with the priestly blessing. Chapter 6, verse 22 through 26, page 594 and 595. And then the tabernacle is sanctified. So I think it's just an interesting narrative, right? So the power of shame. You're awful quiet.
Yeah, it's a little swirl. I'm not. Now, what has the power of shame accomplished? I'm sorry, I'm not. It's not gelling for me. But that's okay.
Introspection.
So
Who's introspecting?
I think that what I think we're saying is that not that necessarily that shame does it, maybe, but that shame will be an integral part and parcel of the growth that comes through introspection. And it's kind of like, the only way to the other side is through the pain. You're not, if we're gonna be shy about our shame, that will negatively impact our ability to introspect.
So we're seeing the wife's exposure in the temple court is what brings on this shame.
Right. So what I'm saying is that in a way, if any of us are trying to have any kind of growth, to move beyond any kind of anything that holds us back in life, there will most likely be a period of an experience of shame as we. I mean, the only way through our problem is not the only. Going through our problem will inevitably bring up these feelings of shame, and they're a sign of the process. And sometimes what happens is, if we get defensive and we deflect the shame, and in so doing we stop our own growth. So what I'm saying is that in a way, this celebration of shame here is an important lesson about how to embrace the shame is to embrace our own growth, rather than to kind of seek to hide and maintain our dignity. That would only preserve the status quo. Good. That's it. We're very thoughtful today.
Does she die if she actually committed the sin?
A gruesome death.
A gruesome death.
Read verse verse 27. Chapter 5, verse 27. gruesome death. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. All right, so this is my I guess what I'm the takeaway of this parsha is that as uncomfortable as I am discussing this, that's part of how we do this. I'm right. It's an uncomfortable thing to read about. It's an uncomfortable thing to discuss. It's an uncomfortable aspect of human nature that's reflected in the Torah. And living with that uncomfortability and poking at the sensitive parts are I think critical to growth and accomplishment. So it's kind of the story within the story. That's that meta text there.
So the Torah does not, what's the word, shirk, shy away from uncomfortable things like adultery and shame.
Well, for sure, the Torah doesn't shy away from things. There's no question about that. I think what makes me uncomfortable about this story is that it almost seems like no one's protecting. I don't know. Maybe I wish that the woman would be protected from her aggressive, untrusting husband, right? But again, the truth is that in the larger story, in the tradition around it, really the rabbis do point to how the woman has a lot in the story. The woman has a lot to do with it by allowing her husband to believe that that there's there's
Don't sometimes men just feel jealous when there's really no cause?
That's the Othello play is about that.
Yeah. So do men sometimes feel jealous where there's no cause? I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess there's a small percentage of people who are pathological, but that's there's also, and this is sort of the tradition around this passage, around this portion of the Torah, is there's also times where certain accusations are believable about certain people, right? And that's something in itself to be looked at. How is it that somebody could believe that I would do this? And that's, again, that, whose fault is it? So I'm kind of, if you don't hear, I'm kind of arguing with myself in my own head here. Whose fault is it? Again, it's not the point whose fault it is. It's not the point.
The point is, let's figure out what happened, learn a way to get past it,
right,
so that it doesn't happen again.
And as I read the story of the Torah, it's not about whose fault it is. It's about what is going on in my head as I read this portion. Right? What am I supposed to hear about my own story here?
What am I I'm supposed to look and see in myself what I possibly could have done wrong, and therefore learn from it. And
right. And I think there's also another thing that comes to mind about this story is that there's an aspect to every unfortunate occurrence in life. There's an aspect of it that's out of my control. My upbringing, my parents, my society, my circumstances, my abilities or the lack thereof, or my pathology. There's a lot of things that we could say, my chemical imbalances, whatever. There's a lot of things that we can always point to and say these are not in my control, right? and there is that here. The husband is jealous of her, and she doesn't control that.
There may be a gossiper.
That's right. There may be a gossiper involved. Absolutely right. Yes.
Telling stories about how that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Telling stories about the woman.
Yeah.
Right, like Iago.
Yeah. In Othello. Yeah. So that's always a part of life. And but that's focusing on that is how we deflect our shame. No growth happens from focusing on that. So there's always a sliver somewhere of something that I do have control over, or that I do have something to work with here. And when I can find that, and the thing that I can feel shame about, that's what I'll know is the part of my path to growth.
The part that I can correct.
Yeah. And hey, it may not fix the situation, because after all, the situation is out of my control. But at the same time, I will have grown. I will have become better as a result.
Well, I'm certainly placing myself in this thing. Viewing my own shortcomings.
Care to share, or is that too embarrassing?
I could share. It might be more embarrassing for you to hear.